So today we're going to talk about a student at the University of Oklahoma named Samantha Fulnecky, who recently found herself in the middle of a controversy after her woke psychology professor assigned the class an article about gender stereotypes to respond to. And Samantha chose to take this opportunity to respond with an essay based on the biblical truths about biological sex and gender roles. As a result, she received a 0 out of 25 on the essay. She tried to appeal the decision to the higher ups at the university, and at this point, the professor in question is on administrative leave. This story has been circulating on my social media for the last couple of days, and interestingly, I started out with one opinion on it when I just kind of saw the surface level story and people's responses to it, versus when I read the article, the assignment, and then Samantha's essay. And while you guys probably know, if you've been on my channel for any length of time, that I 100% stand in support of the fact that there are only two biological sexes, male and female, and whether you are more feminine or more masculine or where you fall on the spectrum of gender expression, that does not change the biological truths. And I also believe that people are generally a lot happier when they embrace their innate characteristics that come along with their biological sex. That is where I stand on this issue. But when it comes to how the teacher graded this student, I'm not entirely sure that I disagree with them, because I'm not sure that Samantha completed the assignment the way that she was supposed to. Do I think that there was some biases in how they were graded? Probably. But ultimately, I think that this conversation is important because while I am 100% in favor of standing up for what is right and standing up for what is true, I think how we do it is really important. And sometimes if we go overboard, then it can have the opposite effect of what we are going for. So that is a really long intro, but I wanted to give you all of that context before we get into this. I would love to hear your guys' opinions as we go along, and let me know whether your opinion was one thing at the beginning and changed at the end, or if you held the same opinion through the entire thing. And if you think I'm entirely wrong, you're allowed to say that, but do so respectfully. Before we get too much further, I am Outspoken Samantha. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate you so much for doing both of those things. So let's get right into this. This is the story that popped up on my social media feed a couple of days ago. It says a University of Oklahoma student who received a 0 out of 25 on an assignment regarding gender norms said she was targeted for her Christian beliefs, citing a scathing response from the teacher's assistant who doled out the grade. Samantha Fulnecky is a junior pre-med student at the Sooners State Flagship University. I was asked to read an article and give my opinion on the article, and the article was about gender binary and mental health and gender stereotypes, specifically in children, because it's a lifespan development class, Fulnecky told Fox News Digital. So I was asked to give my opinion and my reaction to the paper. Fulnecky and her classmates were tasked with writing a response to a scholarly article titled Relations Among Gender Typicality, Peer Relations, and Mental Health During Early Adolescence, summarizing results of a study about gender norms among middle schoolers and the social ramifications children may face for not conforming to gender norms. And moving along to some of the posts that came out after these articles, this was from the Turning Point chapter at the University of Oklahoma. Talking about the situation, they say, for a psychology course at the University of Oklahoma, Samantha Fulnecky was asked to write a 650-word essay reacting to an article about how people are perceived based on societal expectations of gender. In her essay, Fulnecky argued that traditional gender roles should not be considered stereotypes. She cited the Bible to support her stance that eliminating gender in society would be detrimental because that would put people farther from God's original plan for humans. She received 0 points out of 25 in the essay. Transgender professor Mel Curtis said Miss Fulnecky failed to use empirical evidence and called parts of her essay offensive. To call an entire group of people demonic is highly offensive, especially a minoritized population, the instructor wrote in the online grading platform. Fulnecky says she followed the assignment guidelines and should not be penalized for her religious viewpoints. OU officials point to the formal grade appeal process as the student awaits a decision. We at Turning Point OU stand with Samantha. We should not be letting mentally ill professors around students. Clearly, this professor lacks the intellectual maturity to set her own bias aside and take grading seriously. Professors like this are the very reason conservatives can't voice their beliefs in the classroom. Kudos to Samantha for leading by example and standing up for what she believes in. That was initially what I had to go off of. It sounded like this professor was pushing these woke ideas about gender, as a lot of these liberal universities do. And that is why so many people come out of these universities with very different, non-traditional, and pretty much insane ideas about gender. But let's get a little bit further. So I went ahead and read what the assignment was. And then I read, like I said, I read the essay that was assigned, and then I read Samantha's response to it. So I think we need to go through that, and you guys can tell me if you think she completed the assignment appropriately, and if you think that the teacher was being biased, or if they graded appropriately. And then I want to discuss whether or not this is helpful in our fight against these harmful ideas, because at the end of the day, yes, they are absolutely harmful. But this is the assignment. It says, please remember that your reaction paper should not be a summary, but rather a thoughtful discussion of some aspect of the article. Possible approaches to the reaction paper include maybe a discussion about why you feel the topic is important and worthy of study or not, an application of the study or results to your own experiences, an application of the study or results to observations about other behaviors, linking the objectives or findings from the assigned article to other domains of development or other findings that we read about or discuss in class, a suggestion for further studies or experiments that might help researchers better understand the topic being studied, alternate interpretations of the research findings, a discussion of how development in this domain might proceed differently at other developmental stages, your own thoughts about how development proceeds in the domain being researched in the article. There are other possibilities as well. The best reaction papers illustrate that students have read the assigned materials and engaged in critical thinking about some aspects of the article. And then the grading is like this. Number 1, does the paper show a clear tie to the assigned article? 2, does the paper present a thoughtful reaction or response to the article rather than a summary? And 3, is the paper clearly written? So now let's go through just a couple of excerpts from the actual article that they were assigned to respond to. The first is just the abstract, basically just an overview of what they're going to be looking at. It says the current study examines whether being high in gender typicality is associated with popularity, whether being low in gender typicality is associated with rejection/teasing, and whether teasing due to low gender typicality mediates the association with negative mental health. Basically saying if you're going to be more liked or more popular or have an easier time in middle school or amongst this age group, if you fall into more of these stereotypes associated with your gender, like if you're more masculine as a boy and you're more feminine as a girl, or if you are somebody, that's a girl that's a tomboy, or a boy perhaps that's a little more feminine or has more feminine interests, do those things contribute to you having a harder time or maybe being teased or maybe being bullied? And just one more excerpt in the middle of this paragraph, it says, specifically, the current study will examine 1, whether typical characteristics are associated with being popular, 2, whether atypical characteristics are associated with rejection/teasing, 3, whether the degree of typicality is associated with the degree of popularity, and 4, whether teasing due to gender atypicality explains the link between low levels of typicality and more negative mental health. So then we get to the essay that Samantha wrote, and this was a post by Libs of TikTok. It says, wow, Mel Kirk, a transgender professor at the University of Oklahoma, reportedly failed a student's essay about gender norms because the student used the Bible to justify traditional gender roles. Kirk, who uses she/they pronouns, claims the student's essay lacked empirical evidence and was offensive. And Libs of TikTok says, this is unbelievable. So these are just a couple of pages from the essay, and I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts from it. But the first article, or the first paragraph, says, this article was very thought-provoking and caused me to thoroughly evaluate the idea of gender and the role it plays in our society. The article discussed peers using teasing as a way to enforce gender norms. I do not necessarily see this as a problem. She goes on. She says, God made male and female and made us differently from each other on purpose and for a purpose. God is very intentional with what he makes, and I believe trying to change that would only do more harm. Gender roles and tendencies should not be considered stereotypes. Women naturally want to do womanly things because God created us with those womanly desires in our hearts. The same goes for men. God created men in the image of his courage and strength, and he created women in the image of his beauty. He intentionally created women differently than men, and we should live our lives with that in mind. It is frustrating to me when I read articles like this and discussion posts from my classmates of so many people trying to conform to the same mundane opinion so they do not step on people's toes. I think that it is cowardly and an insincere way to live. It is important to use the freedom of speech we have been given in this country, and I personally believe that eliminating gender in our society would be detrimental, as it pulls us farther from God's original plan for humans. It is perfectly normal for kids to follow gender stereotypes because that is how God made us. The reason so many girls want to feel womanly and care for others in a motherly way is not because they feel pressured to fit into societal norms. It is because God created and chose them to reflect his beauty and his compassion in that way. In Genesis, God says that it is not good for man to be alone, so he created a helper for man, which is a woman. Many people assume the word helper in this context to be condescending and offensive to women. However, the original word in Hebrew is Ezer Kengedo. I can't read that. And that directly translates to helper equal to. She says, I do not think men and women are pressured to be more masculine or feminine. I strongly disagree with the idea from the article that encouraging acceptance of diverse gender expressions could improve students' confidence. Society pushing the lie that there are multiple genders and everyone should be whatever they want to be is demonic and severely harms American youth. I do not want kids to be teased or bullied in school. However, pushing the lie that everyone has their own truth and everyone can do whatever they want and be whoever they want is not biblical whatsoever. So those are the two ideas that are battling against each other right now, and a lot of us are familiar with that battle. This was the response, at least part of it, from the professor. She says, please note that I am not deducting points because you have certain beliefs, but instead I am deducting points for you posting a reaction paper that does not answer the questions for this assignment, contradicts itself, heavily uses personal ideology over empirical evidence in a scientific class, and is at times offensive. I don't know how you can claim to be a scientific class when you are an individual that uses she, they pronouns. Therefore, you think that you can pick your gender, and that is anti-scientific. But she says, while you are entitled to your own personal beliefs, there is an appropriate time or place to implement them in your reflections. I encourage all students to question or challenge the course material with other empirical findings or testable hypotheses. But using your own personal beliefs to argue against the findings of not only this article, but the findings of countless articles across psychology, biology, sociology, etc., is not best practice. Just to go a little bit further, she says, you argue that abiding by normative gender roles is beneficial. It is perfectly fine to believe this, but to then say that everyone should act the same while also saying that people aren't pressured into gender expectations is contradictory, especially since your arguments reflect a religious pressure to act in gender stereotypical ways. You can say that strict gender norms don't create gender stereotypes, but that isn't true by definition of what a stereotype is. Please note that acknowledging gender stereotypes does not immediately denote a negative connotation, a nuance this article discusses. Additionally, to call an entire group of people demonic is highly offensive, especially a minoritized population. She goes on to say, you are entitled to your own beliefs, but that this isn't a vague narrative of society pushes lies, but instead the result of countless years developing psychological and scientific evidence for these claims and directly interacting with communities involved. You may personally disagree with this, but that doesn't change the fact that every major psychological, medical, pediatric, and psychiatric association in the United States acknowledges that biology and psychological sex and gender is neither binary nor fixed. And then she did get feedback from another professor who also has pronouns in their bio, so do with that what you will. She says, Samantha, I am the other instructor for this course, and I have also taken the time to read your paper. I concur with Mel on the grade you received. This paper should not be considered as a completion of the assignment. Everyone has different ways in which they see the world, but in an academic course such as this, you are being asked to support your ideas with empirical evidence and higher level reasoning. I find it concerning that you state at the beginning of your paper that you do not think teasing is a bad thing. In addition, your paper directly and harshly criticizes your peers and their opinions, which are just as valuable as yours. Disagreeing with others is fine, but there is a respectful way to go about it. That goes for discussion posts as well as reaction papers. Please employ more thoughtfulness in your future assignment. So I really had to sit back and think about all of this put together because as I said, 100% male and female, those are the only two sexes. Your psychology is connected to your biology, and to suggest otherwise is just an extension of this demonic, I would say it's a demonic ideology that has spread throughout medicine. And just because you have a bunch of experts that are willing to go along with it does not mean that they are correct. And I think a lot of times we forget that this ideology came from an individual who was a predator, Dr. John Money, whose ideas were debunked after this stuff had already started to spread through the medical profession, the education of future medical professionals and whatnot. So this is not something that comes from a good place or a place of wanting people to be healthy and to live their best lives or whatever we are being sold now. It is from a place that was predatory in the beginning, and it is just as predatory today. So what do you guys think? Do you think that this professor was correct in how she graded the assignment based on how Samantha did the assignment? Or do you think that she was being completely biased and that she just targeted this person because the biblical references offended her? I think it's a little bit of both. I do have to say, when I read through what the expectations of the assignment were and I read through the article, I do think that Samantha went overboard with her biblical references. And I think she went overboard with her personal ideology. And I think there was a way that she could have done it to include biblical passages, included her personal ideology, while also pointing to studies and sources that prove that children end up being happier if you continuously teach them that their biology is linked to their brain and their psychology, and that it is harmful and false to teach them that it's not. But I did think that the article was interesting because if you guys think back to your own personal school experiences and you think about the kids who were more likely to be bullied, in my mind, from what I remember, it wasn't that long ago, it was the kids that were less gender typical, whatever that means. You know, the girls that were more tomboys or the boys that were more feminine or had interests that were not so much aligned with being a boy. Those were the people that tend to be bullied more, whereas the boys that were more, strongly masculine and the girls that were more defined as feminine tended to do better off. And I never really thought about that. So I do think that there is something to the article, and I actually found it interesting to read. But I also think that unintentionally, this professor providing this article proves kids can be led to believe that they are the wrong gender based on teasing and bullying. And that is something that we are seeing in a lot of kids, especially now as this has been going on for a while, people that are detransitioning, believing that they were born in the wrong body because of how they were treated by other students or because of a miserable experience at that age, because they were teased for not being gender conforming or being a little bit different than their peers. And we can point to this and say that kids might be transitioning because they're being bullied and not because they were actually born in the wrong body. So I think that there was something to be said that perhaps Samantha could have explored that aspect of the argument. But overall, I do think it's important when we have these discussions and when we stand up for what is right and stand up for what we believe in, that we have balance. And that's something that I think Charlie Kirk did really well, as he talked a lot about biblical truths, but he also brought in science and data and evidence. Because as we know, God created everything. That means he gave us the Bible and he gave us science. So these things are going to be linked, and you can prove your arguments using both. But when you go too heavily into your religious ideology, and I do think that there is a time and a place for these things, but when you go too heavily, then you lose people. And if they think that all you have to back up your arguments is your religion and your Bible, and that you don't have science on your side, then they're going to feel like that's further confirmation that they are right because science entirely supports them. My last thought on this is that I do think Samantha's essay was written in response to probably more of her experience in this class versus just this one essay. But I do think if she had focused primarily just on the essay instead of including everything else that she's probably been dealing with in these universities, and as other students have said they're dealing with in these universities, she probably would have done a little bit better. Again, I think it's important to just have these conversations and to evaluate these things based on the entire picture so that we understand how to approach these arguments and be more effective in the future. But I would love to hear what you guys think. Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. As you guys know, we always end with Charlie Kirk. Keep it real, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
What is a woman?
That's a stupid question, dude. That's a dumb question.
What is a woman? It's not a trick question. What is a woman?
Who identifies as a woman?
You can't answer the question with the question. Yeah, define the woman without saying woman.
It's a social
You're in college, paying for an education. What is a woman?
How about you talk to someone with media training? How about you talk to someone?
You don't need media training. It's not a trick. What is a woman? You can't answer the question with the... It's the college kids of America going hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt who think it's a trick question when you ask them what a woman is.